Hi, I'm Dr. David Ajibade. I want to say a few things about Alzheimer's disease and the two different approaches and understanding of the disease condition. The first one, which is the conventional approach, or what I would term the old approach, because hopefully it's going to be changed, has to do with amyloid plaques and tau tangles. And so the whole theory is that Alzheimer's disease develops because over time, these proteins called amyloid beta and they tend to, which are formed normally in the brain, but they tend to accumulate at a higher rate and they tend to misfold. And so, excuse me, and so form plaques. Same thing with the tau tangles, which are actually inside the neurons. The amyloid plaques are, excuse me, are outside the neurons. The tau tangles are within the neurons. Tau protein is also formed within the neurons normally, but again, there's some kind of misfunction, which is a mystery to most people, that causes the tau, the proteins to tangle up and so shut down transmission. They affect what are known as the microtubules, and those tubules are responsible for transmission of or transport of nutrients and electrolytes around the neuron. So those are the two things: tau tangles and amyloid plaques. Over time, with their accumulation, they tend to shut down the synapses. They tend to shut down the neurons and eventually kill the brain. Obviously, kill the person, and then the brain, or the brain and then the person, whichever comes first. Now, the problem with that, I can see at least three problems. One is that if you make it all about the plaques and the tangles, removal of those plaques has not been shown to improve cognition or improve overall health of the person. And think about this: billions and billions and billions of dollars have been poured into this research to find that magic drug that's going to remove those plaques from the brain of that person, and then all our problems will be solved. So far, it hasn't. 99%, I would say 100%, simply have not been able to show a significant improvement in the health of anybody by addressing the amyloid plaques. It's more difficult to remove the tau tangles. I haven't seen any research that shows them actually developing drugs to remove the tau tangles. I guess to remove the tau tangles, you have to remove the neurons and kill the neurons themselves. So they don't even think about that, or they don't even focus on that. It's just the amyloid plaques, which are outside of the neurons. Another reason why it's not working like it should is that there are autopsy studies of people who have had major amyloid plaques in their brains on autopsy, like I said, and yet there was no indication, none, of any kind of cognitive defects, behavioral defects, or brain whatever problem. These people are functioning normally, and you probably heard about the famous nun study, where in the convent, the nuns dedicated, or they donated their brains to research when they died, and they looked in their brains. These nuns have been active till their death, and they were riddled with amyloid plaques. So that's not going to work either. So there are other things that are involved that they're beginning to see, things like inflammation, things like free radical damage and immune dysfunction, and so on and so forth, which will probably, and of course, another thing, blood vessel damage, blood vessel deficiencies, and blood vessel compromise. So the other things they're going to see. But the thing that is really the most striking now is research that has recently come out by a neurologist and researcher named Matthew Schrag, Dr. Matthew Schrag, who decided to start looking, or who was commissioned really, to look into this whole theory of the amyloid plaques. And he found out that one of the leading researchers and the leading companies that are involved, institutions that are involved in this whole research have written and published some of the most referenced papers on the whole thing with amyloid plaques and dementia. They found out that there was a lot of fraud, believe it or not, involved in the pictures. The claim is that the pictures were doctored. The picture is showing that it's the amyloid plaques that are causing the disease. They begin to see that he showed that those pictures were actually doctored. So that throws a shadow on a lot of different research and a lot of approaches towards this whole Alzheimer's disease. That's another story for another time. But the whole point I'm trying to make is that this whole thing about amyloid plaques, this excessive focus on amyloid plaques is not going to get us to the promised land.